We are so lucky today to have Alana Powell as our guest. Welcome back to the show. Many of you know Alana is the executive director of the AECEO, and we are so excited to let everyone know that the Association of Early Childhood Educators Ontario has recently become unionized. So, in this process, Alana had the opportunity to participate in our collective bargaining, which means the agreement that we all came to that governs our employment. So today we're going to be talking about what that was like for Alana on the employer side of things. And please go check out our episode with myself, Amber, and Jess, where we talked about our perspective on that experience. Welcome, Alana.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having me back.
So, when you heard or decided that the AECEO was going to become unionized, what was your initial reaction?
Well, so the timing I think was very interesting because I had just come back from maternity leave, and upon my reintegration into the workplace, I heard the great news that the AECO team had decided to unionize. It was like, this is incredible. Like, we talk all the time about how important unionization is, how important it is that staff have the opportunity to collaborate in setting the conditions of their work and deciding those through these democratic processes. So I was really, really excited at first. And then I think I kind of sat back and realized, as the employer, that now this experience is going to be really different for me going through it from that perspective. And I started to get a little worried about what that might be like.
I mean, I think there's a lot of people who feel a little anxious around unionization because it's kind of a mystery in a lot of ways. It's not something that we really learn about or talk about very often. So I think that's like a natural reaction. And in a previous episode, myself, Amber, and Jess talked about that we also had hesitations and concerns and fears. So I think on both sides, joy and also, oh, what comes next?
Yeah, and I think too, I've never worked in a unionized workplace before, so I was really unfamiliar with the process itself. And that certainly, I think, contributed to some of the fear and uncertainty I had. And I trusted that it was a good decision, and I believed that it would, create a better workplace for everyone and strengthen the organization. But yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty at the outset. I found some great ways to work through that, which I'm hoping we'll talk about. But I think it's good to acknowledge that fear, and it's good to acknowledge the uncertainty, because I suspect I'm not alone in feeling that on the employer side. Even as someone who is like very, very supportive of the process and really believed in it, I still felt uncertain, and I still felt a little unsure about my own abilities to navigate us through it, and also like how to do it in a good way, and what it might mean for the organization.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's jump into that because I'm curious if you want to share what your approach was to collective bargaining and just sort of familiarizing yourself with the process.
One of the first things I did to try to understand what it meant as an employer to be, at the outset of this journey was, of course, I Googled. I Googled, like, what does it mean to go through collective bargaining as an employer? What was really interesting was that the resources I found online were all about how to stop the unionization process, how to union bust, how to disrupt it. And
Wow.
none of the resources were about how to support a positive, collaborative process for unionization. And I thought that was really interesting. And so I had to think a bit more creatively about how I was going to find access to the knowledge that I felt I needed and the resources and support I needed in order to make sure we went through that process in a good way, or at least that I contributed as much to that process in a good way as I could. I certainly turned to our board of directors for folks who had lived experience, previous experience with that. But I also was directed by Rachel Vickerson, who was the interim executive director while I was on leave. She had found an article that was written by Planned Parenthood Ottawa, or they were featured in the article, where they talked about their unionization process and how it was, collaborative and strengthened the organization. And there's similar smaller organization reliant on grant funding. So I could see the same sort of challenges I was already trying to grapple with. Like, well, how do we do this when our funding is so inconsistent? How do we do this when we don't know what our income will be next year? Like, how do we do this in a good way when it's really difficult to plan? So I reached out to them and I said, like, would you have lunch with me and talk to me about what your experience was? And that was really the beginning, I think, of figuring out a good way to do this and figuring out that it was really up to me to decide how are we going to approach this? How can I contribute to making this a good and collaborative process? So that one-to-one lunch, shout out to you, JC, was a very important part of my process.
Whoa, that's so cool that took those so many steps to figure out, where you wanted what place you wanted to come from and leaning on those other people to kind of, yeah, find your way through it. It's interesting just to go back about, your initial Google search. In our Unions 101 document, we link to some resources and talk a bit about union busting. And fortunately, it is a very common narrative that employers don't want to have their workplace unionized. But the fact that there are people out there who have other perspectives, I think is so important. And to be able to collaborate with them and learn from them is so amazing.
Yeah, to your point, too bad that there's not, a greater diversity of resources out there to support employers because I understand that initial fear of like, often when it feels like things are changing around you at a pace that, maybe you're not in control of and you don't know how it's going to work out. And, in early learning and childcare, we're all dealing with tenuous funding and uncertainty. So it's natural to sort of respond to that changing ecosystem by wanting to control it even more, right? It's like everything is about to change and I don't know what that's going to look at. So I have to get a better handle and control this instead of seeing the process as the point, right? That
Yeah.
open the process and allowing those vulnerabilities, that uncertainty to become what drives your conversation. There's no changing the uncertainty. There's no changing the vulnerability of our organizations or of the system. So how do we do our best within it? And once that was the framing for the question, then those things didn't become something I was afraid of addressing, but something I knew we would be able to address together. And that it would, going through that process of talking through funding and timelines would actually increase all of our knowledge and all of our understandings and all of our creative problem solving around how do you create the best conditions in sometimes circumstances that aren't in your control. And I think that was a strength of our process, but it does require you to let go of control and accept the vulnerability of it and be able to say I don't know and let me figure that out and become comfortable with that uncomfortable process. But it creates something really beautiful if you can do it, for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in the work that we do at the AECEO, we are familiar with that sort of process oriented um, journey where you don't know what the next step is even going to look like. And having the opportunity to work with the bargaining team and yourself and other board members to kind of come together rather than being adversarial was so cool. And I think really, like you said, just made it such a growth opportunity for all of us, really.
Yeah. And I think too, the opportunity as an employer to say, first of all, regardless of how I felt about the unionization process, which, I felt good about despite my sort of fears and uncertainties, like I supported it and believed in it. There's also a recognition that like this is not up to me or about me at
Mm,
all. It's the right of workers to do this, and I have no right to intervene. or to stop the process. And I think that was also, it's something really important because again, that sense that you want to like control even more or tighten things even more in response to change when it's actually our job to say, okay, like I'm ready to listen. It's good to have that dialogue. It's good to challenge our own thinking. And we did come up with solutions that weren't at the top of my list. And some of the things that were at the top of my list, we didn't get to. So, it was an iterative process, but we created it together instead of me just assuming I knew what was right for everyone. And I think that's part of the point. This is the right of the workers. This matters to the workers. Their voices matter. Them doing this together matters. Even if it means you're sort of on the outside of it, that's okay. It's okay to be on the outside of that.
Yeah. But I think there were times where even I was surprised by the generosity that you came to the table with. We would ask for something and you would say, actually, I want to do you one better and come to the table with something that we hadn't even thought was an option. So to have that collaborative environment where we all had the best interests of the staff and the organization as our starting point was so cool.
Yeah, and I thought that was what was really interesting too about that shared perspective of balancing what's best for the staff and what's best for the organization. And that was where the two perspectives really came together, right? Because as the employer and, folks on the board side, like there is this bird's eye view of the organizations and its needs and the finances and all of this that we could bring and say, what, we can go further on this because
Hmm.
certain things are easier to do within, a budgetary cycle than other things. And so us being able to work back and forth really helped. And I found, there was this moment through the process where I think my approach shifted because I realized what's really helpful for us instead of just, thinking about trying to interpret the intentions through the language of the collective agreement was to actually sit down and be like, tell me what your intention is here. Like, tell me what you're trying to get. Tell me what this feels like in your day-to-day work. Because,
Hmm.
the language of collective agreements is not the language we use to talk to each other about our work either. And that was really daunting, certainly, well, like grappling with some of that language. But I felt like through asking different questions about, what does it feel like? What is the problem you're trying to solve with this language? What's your intention in asking for this? And not in a confrontational way, but to really understand was helpful because then so many times where I thought perhaps we're on two different sides of the page here, I was like, oh no, we agree with that. We just need to
Hmm.
word it like this so it becomes operationally possible. So it makes
Yeah.
sense in the structure of the organization. And in a lot of ways, I think that helped reduce the amount of times we maybe came to points thinking we were on different sides and realized,
Hmm.
no, we're actually on the same page. We agree. Um, let's just make sure it makes sense for the CEO. And I thought that was really cool too.
Yeah. So cool. So I'm wondering how you think unionization can benefit workers and supervisors collectively in light
Yes.
of all of this discussion.
Great question. I think we talk a lot about how unionization can benefit workers, having a voice in their conditions. A lot of times it leads to very good improvements or the best improvements you can get in relation to compensation issues and other conditions. But I don't know that we often talk about how it can benefit the employer. And for me, the structure of the collective agreement is really beneficial. Knowing that if we're faced with a situation, there's already sort of a path to an answer. It helps, I think, respond to situations that may occur in the staff team with an equitable and flexible approach. Like instead of feeling like every time there's a something we have to address, we're starting from scratch or we're reinventing the wheel or oh, what did we do last time? It kind of lays out like under these terms and in these processes, we'll resolve these conflicts. It also, I think, embraces the fact that sometimes conflicts are natural and normal. It makes it less scary because we have a pathway. And I think as an employer who really tries to create a caring workplace, it helps relieve some of the stress around how we manage individual and group needs. Like that's a really difficult thing to address, right? And you want to make a workplace that's in the best interest of everyone. And sometimes the best way to do that seems really unclear. Like, do we meet everyone's individual needs where they're at? Do we prioritize the group? And the collective agreement let us set out some of those terms collaboratively, as opposed to feeling like you really have to respond each and every time to a new and unique situation. So I feel better equipped to lead an organization because these processes are in place. I feel like I have more clarity. I feel like when we don't know what to do, we have something to look to, even if the situation is not described in the collective agreement. There's sort of a guiding post for like, what's a good process now to identify this? And then we can build that in future collective agreements. So I think it's really helped us all in the sense of creating that structure that we all agree upon, we all share, and we share responsibility for as well. But I do really think it can help us as employers to be the best kind of employers we can be and be fair and equitable and caring and responsive without feeling like you're kind of on your own trying to figure it out all the time.
So now that the AECEO is unionized and you've had this experience, I think it's important for listeners to know this is just our individual experience of this. There's lots of different ways to become unionized, lots of different groups that can support you, and everybody's going to have a totally different experience. But is there anything else you'd really like listeners to know?
I think my biggest reflection on the process would just be to embrace the uncertainty and find some community of like-minded people who have done this in a way that feels good for you. Like it felt right for me to approach this in an open and collaborative and caring way. I wasn't even sure at the outset that I would get that kind of response from the union because I just don't know. And like many others thought, oh, this is a conflictual process because sometimes I think it can be. It does not have to be that way. I think you can approach it with openness, with collaboration, with transparency. And I think that can really change the dynamic of the journey, the way it builds a team that's closer, that's more connected, that understands the conditions the organization is in. Like we were very transparent with like, this is how much money we have this year. This is how
Mhm.
much money we have next year. This is how much money we can move to next year. And talking about all those contextual things that really inform the decision making around compensation elements and things like that, and why we can and cannot do certain things. And I think the fact that we were able to have those conversations really openly um, just brought the team closer together and allowed us to find solutions that worked now and allowed us to come together on goals of where we want the organization to go and to strengthen our resolve to sort of find ways to get there. So I think I would, communicate to other employers like this isn't a scary, even if it is feeling scary, it doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be conflictual. It can be a really positive, caring, collaborative experience. And to just suggest, reach out to me, reach out to someone else in your network who's been through it, because having that support of someone saying, it's okay when things are hard, it's okay if you don't know, just ask the questions was really, really helpful for me. And to educators out there, I think I would just encourage them to explore their options. Like it is your right to want to be a part of a union, to have a voice in creating your working conditions. And it can lead to changes, that really benefit your workplace and can strengthen the organization. So I would just encourage everyone to, yeah, approach it from a place of curiosity and openness and find your community so you're not feeling so alone or scared because you're not.
Yeah. Awesome. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Alana.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider becoming a member. The link to join us will be in the episode description. Your membership makes a difference in the lives of ECEs and childcare workers, children, and families, and allows us to continue doing this work. To all the members currently supporting us, thank you so much. And to all the ECEs and childcare workers listening, you are incredible and amazing and so valued.